What's going on, Vital? I'm Johnny Simonetti. Today we're taking a look at my test bike for the year. This is a Scott Ransom, and today I'm going to run through the components I picked. You might have noticed that our test sessions looked a little different this year, and the idea was that we start with a bike that kind of checks all the boxes and see if we can improve them. So let's get into it. So I'm going to kind of just disassemble the bike and run through all the parts as I go. So starting off, we got the wheel set here from ENVE. This is an AM30 wheel set and is their kind of more budget friendly option. It's hard to say carbon wheels and budget friendly go in the same sentence, but they're legitimately half the cost of their top of the line wheels, and I've been super happy with them. So looking at the rear wheel now, just a couple turns on a few of those spokes. 3 spokes, took about a full turn on one and half a turn on some others. The rest of the spokes seem pretty tight. Really impressed with this wheel set overall. It's just been pretty carefree all year. Now taking a look at the front wheel. It's like 1, maybe 2 spots. All right, looks like we're good. About 1 full turn on the middle spoke of that section and a half turn on the surrounding 2. I'll take it. For the abuse these things have taken, that's not too bad. Next up, we'll move on to the brakes. This bike uses headset cable routing, which I've had the cables through all year. Even through our fork shootout where we had to swap 6 forks on the bike on and off. At no point did I really have an issue with it, but with our most recent test being the brake shootout, didn't really want to deal with bleeding 6 sets of brakes back to back, so went for the stick-on Amazon cable guides, which honestly are awesome. I think external brake routing is underrated. A couple zip ties here to cut. You'll notice these are the Magura MT7s on here, which took the top spot in the test, but I have actually had the SRAM Mavens on this bike all year long. Felt like these just kind of give you that power in a little bit more of a gentle way, so opted to continue riding them. With these Maguras, it is a 2-bolt clamp design here at the handlebar, which I'm not crazy about. I really do like the matchmaker that SRAM uses, but really cool to try something different, and honestly these brakes work really well. Obviously we've got the MT7s here that came off the bike just now, but I also have the original set of Mavens, and we can take a look now at the brake pad life, see how these have held up. I've had these on since I built the bike and only put the Maguras on last week, so these will have a more accurate indication of pad life. Rear pads are pretty much gone down to the spring. Looks like I'm getting maybe some uneven wear there. As you can see, it's kind of tapering from front to back as those pads roll on. It looks like the rear is just about done, but the front has, I don't know, maybe 20% of its life left, so kind of interesting there to see. I'll check the front and see if that's the same. These look a little bit more even, so I'll need to see what's going on with that rear caliper. Actually, these have a slight taper as well. Kind of just wanted to give an idea of how things wear out, and a lot of these are relatively new products, so I think it's interesting to see kind of how these things hold up throughout the year. And taking a look at some of the other cockpit details here, I've got the Deity Black Label bar, which is a 31/8 aluminum bar, paired to a 42 mil copperhead stem. Tried a 35, tried a 50, and it just was kind of in between, and this is perfect. Deity introduced this recently. Great looking stem, and it gives you a lot of adjustability up or down because it's got such a low profile. Sensus Meatypaw grips. These things are just, fit like a glove, and nothing else out there feels the same. Speaking of things that feels like nothing else, this Ohlins suspension was something that I chose specifically building this bike up because I'd ridden it in the past on only 1 or 2 other bikes, and I had a difficult time getting comfortable on their dual crown fork, which I had on my bike for a couple years. And then riding the single crown fork, I couldn't believe it was like a night and day difference just with how much smoother it was. And I really like the simplicity of the adjustments. They don't give you a ton of clicks to get lost in. It's kind of just as straightforward as it gets. Up here there's a Syncros headset, which I definitely had my doubts about. It uses plastic cups that drop into the frame, but they do allow a really simple way of an angle adjust. I just have the centered kind of middle position one that I've been using for the whole year, and it's nice. It just pops out super easy. Really pleased that it's held up as well as it has. I thought that like first time I case a jump it was just gonna break into a million pieces, and the guys over at Scott told me like, nah, really the only way you can break it is to install it improperly. I know this is a big concern for a lot of people, so I kind of wanted to shine some light on my experience with it, with a year of abuse on them. It's like some, I don't know, metal deposits or something left behind there. This will be the ring that sits in that cup. Might actually be steel with just a sort of rubberized coating on it. That sits in there. Taking a look at this bearing. Yeah, and it's still smooth as can be. So that's the lower cup. Now the play that I experienced on the upper cup was from this cap here. You can kind of see there's two little posts there that lock into these two holes, and I think just a slight misalignment caused them to sort of mushroom out, and now they no longer fit in there. To solve that, I just kind of filed them down slightly so that it can just sit flush wherever. But the whole purpose of that is to help line up with these cable routing ports right here where your hoses will fit through. So it's kind of nice. Syncros does these little plugs in here that allow you to close off one side or the other if you don't need it. And with most of my stuff being Bluetooth, I opted to run that and just kind of keep stuff out of there. Looking at the upper bearing, I believe it's got a two-piece inner race here, so it comes off like that. And similar to the lower cup, this supports the bearing. As cool as the design is, the durability is always a concern. Not just saying this stuff to sell you guys a Syncros headset or cable routing, but more so just kind of give you a real world experience of how this stuff actually holds up. All right, next up we got the transmission XO drivetrain. No brainer in my opinion. It's the super simple, really good shifting setup and requires, you know, zero maintenance. Setup on these cranks are my favorite pedals of all time, the DMR vaults, which I guess they're appropriate considering this is the bike that Brendog rides, so sticking with what works. Just rebuilt them this year, so they feel like they're brand new pretty much. The concave is really good, and the champering on them is kind of what stands out for me. They just kind of glide off of rocks when you catch them. These are never that easy. Oh yeah. See if I can try a little life hack on that. There you go. Easy as can be. I'm not going to pull the BB out just because I don't have a replacement one. It is a PressFit interface and it hasn't creaked this whole time. Like I said, the only creaking issues I ran into were with the chainring coming loose. My suggestion on these is, if you're installing one, is use a low strength blue Loctite. It kind of just helps fill in those gaps, and as you ride it, it gives it some kind of wiggle room where I feel like grease or something like that will just attract dirt and kind of induce more creaking over time. So that's what I do on this, and it's been dead silent. Taking a look at the drivetrain, the cassette has a bit of wear on the bigger teeth here, and kind of to be expected. As you shift into that hard gear, it puts quite a bit of load on it. Not seeing any broken or damaged teeth, just kind of normal wear. I'm not always the best about lubing my chain, so a bit of that chain rub is definitely showing through in some of the gears I use more. Same thing with the derailleur. It's gotten hit a handful of times and still running no problem, so happy to see that. Cranks have a few little strikes, but nothing bent, nothing broken, just kind of standard. And then with the chainring, there's a little bit more wear, like I mentioned earlier. Yeah, right there. I think the first test we went to, I ran into a rock pretty hard and kind of flattened that tooth. Yeah, normal chain rub from riding left foot forward. I'm willing to bet this maybe isn't the right one for one of these chains, but looks like we're under half a link of wear, so yeah, I'm going to say that's probably not the right tool for the job. Unless these chains just never wear out, which I'd be pretty stoked if that's the case. And then the moment everyone's been waiting for, what's in the box?
What's in the box?
Not until you give me the
What's in the box?
Let's find out. I've got a RockShox Vivid coil inside. This bike uses a standard 205 by 65 millimeter Trunnion shock and has a ton of clearance options. The standard door that it comes with is a little more restricted, but they do make a larger door for live valve and flight attendant systems to fit, which pretty much opens up a world of possibilities for whatever you want to put in there. Here's kind of an overview of the shocks I tried on the bike. The bike ships with this special Float X nude shock, and it features a super high volume air chamber, and the nude function is this little remote lockout type deal. It's actually Scott's track lock system. So essentially pulling this closes off this extra chamber to reduce the shock down to a standard Float X, and in return they say it reduces travel, which basically comes from the additional ramp and support. It is unable to reach full travel because there's so much support there. Really, really cool technology and something that I'm really interested in trying again. I just need to get an appropriate rebound tune because the stock tune was quite light for my body weight. The pressure that I have to run the shock at just kind of made it hard to control. So yeah, we'll be revisiting this. I then moved on to the shock that Ohlins provided me, this TTX coil. Had them kind of do their thing with the tune and get it all set up. One thing that was difficult is that where this rebound knob has to sit to reach, there's no option but this knob that's kind of ergonomic, so I kind of had to reach in with an Allen and get it to add or remove clicks, but landed on a happy spot pretty quickly. I ran the 571 spring. This eyelet hardware did wear out pretty quick, so you will run through rear shock hardware a little bit quicker on this frame because there's so much rotational movement. Something to consider. While I was riding the TTX coil, I did try out the air shock a few times and kind of just wanted to throw it on for the days where I found myself pedaling a bit more and riding flatter terrain. And it kind of just firmed the bike up, helped it ride a little higher in the travel, but I felt like it did lack on successive hits quite a bit. I think I can experiment a bit more with the negative volume and positive volume to dial it in a bit more. So I'll be looking forward to doing that over the winter. Moving on to the Vivid coil, with this thing launching this year, we got a few to try out ahead of launch, and straight away I felt really comfortable. Almost identical to where the Ohlins was. While the low speed has less clicks, I felt like they were easier to kind of land on a happy spot. High speed has more clicks, which I found to be useful as I was looking for a little bit more adjustment there. And then also that hydraulic bottom out is always super useful, even though I had it a bit more on the open side. It's always a nice thing to have in your back pocket should you need it. Finally, tested out the live valve Neo shock based on a DHX coil. This thing was super rad. It rode amazing in the open position, and the firm modes kind of gave me a look at what something like the track lock system would provide, where it like firms up a bit. And yeah, the bike felt super fast. I found this to be really beneficial on longer descents where there's more intermediate, not as aggressive terrain more often. And the biggest benefit I felt with this shock was just rolling speed. I felt like the bike just carried speed easier, it pedaled better, all those things. It kind of just felt like it was going faster. Not sure it's something that I need day to day because I'm not really riding at such a high speed all the time, but if you're racing, I think this is a great option for an enduro race bike. You might be wondering, how do you get to the rebound knob? And the answer is there is another door back here that pops off, which a 3mm Allen wrench can then reach inside to turn. Pretty cool that Scott was able to package this thing the way they did and take into consideration useful features like that that are, you know, essential to have. With the frame having the shock tucked inside, I know a lot of people think like, oh, it must be a maintenance nightmare. It must be all these difficult things you got to do, and I have swapped the shock countless times this year, kind of just with having a few things to test, just kind of wanting to see how good I could get the bike to ride. And it doesn't take very long at all, as I'll kind of show you here. The rear shock bolt removes from this little window on the other side. Other two bolts are just these trunnion bolts at the head here. One thing I'm not crazy about is that they're all T30s, but with all those out of the way, shock just comes right out. That's what's been hiding in there most of the year. I'll pull this frame apart and kind of inspect all these pivots as well. Lay everything out and we can take a look at it. I realized after editing this that I forgot to touch on my saddle and dropper setup. For the dropper, I'm not too picky. Whoever makes the longest Bluetooth dropper wins. And for that reason, I've got the new Fox Neo transfer on there. It's been durable so far, really reliable, and I really like the feeling of the lever. On top of that, I've got an Ergon Enduro SM saddle. This lower link, I didn't get the chance to disassemble. It does require a BB T47 tool and just kind of threads together in the middle. There's also two bolts at the back here that pinch around that sleeve. Taking a look at the frame components, starting off with the rear shock. This thing has required zero maintenance. I know most coil shocks are pretty notorious for not needing much, and that certainly rings true. Kind of just set and forget. Moving on to the rest of the hardware, one other cool feature is actually inside the rear axle here. It's got one of these levers that just kind of plugs in to fill that 6mm Allen interface. Most of this frame uses T30 bolts and T25 bolts, which, you know, are a little less common. And this little end cap actually gives you all three. So it's a 6mm, T25, and T30 all in one. Just kind of slots in there. Super clean design from Syncros and Scott on that one. Another little cover here to access the rear shock bolt, which I did have a little trouble with earlier in the year. I put Loctite on all these bolts, and having it kind of leak onto the shaft of the bolt did create a little bit of a difficulty getting it out in one instance. All right, all the pivot hardware is really clearly labeled with inner and outer washers. So just gonna clean these up as we go. You can kind of see how much dirt they've accumulated over the year. I know this is a lot more washers than most people would like to see on the rear of a bike, but I think with the color coordination, it really helps make life a little easier. So hats off to Scott there for, you know, thinking about juggling all this stuff and how it's going to go back together. In my opinion, not too bad. Like, I kind of prefer having the bearings that have a stepped design to them, but I understand that that doesn't, you know, work for everyone, and this frame has obviously got some unique constraints that I'm sure kind of, you know, led this to being the best option. But what really matters is that it's held up, and 90% of it hasn't needed any attention. The two areas that have required attention are that rear shock bolt has a lot of rotation. The shock they spec with the bike comes with a bearing eyelet. These are all pretty clean. Just kind of the normal grease on them to help hold them in place, but no like marring or anything or deep grooves developing. It all looks like it's been running nice and tidy. So you have some paint chipping around this link here. I think just kind of from contacting stuff. I'm not sure if that's even visible when those uprights are on, but it looks like maybe getting a bit of lateral flex there through those has maybe caused some contact. And at the back here as well, yeah, there's, I don't know if this is from rocks wedging in there or what, but a few little marks at the back where the seat stay bridges connect. Could just be stuff getting wedged in there or just rocks flying up and hitting it. Majority of the wear that I've noticed has been on this chainstay bridge. Just some heel rub, and then good number of rock chips here on the front. I think is kind of anticipated, but it looks like that's the one spot the ride wrap kit kind of doesn't cover. But it does get this little bottom portion, so maybe an additional piece just on this surface would save you some paint chips there. Moving on to the door cover here. This is the extended version, which does feel like it's made out of a bit more of a brittle material than the one that ships with the bike, which has a little bit nicer finish. It's got this little rubber band in here to hold the tool in place. I don't know if this is a pre-production version or what, but a RockShox did break the side here a little bit, so seems to be a little bit more brittle than what they normally ship the bike with. Moving on, we've got the internal frame storage here. This is kind of just like a little plastic sleeve that threads into the frame. And my issue with it was that it can kind of rattle in there. The brake hose runs on top of it. I just ran a piece of this Jaguar foam housing over the brake. And then for the door itself, got the old handy USPS mailer and just kind of wrapped it up, shoved it in there. Funny reminder, and every time I'd open the door, you kind of see the little edge of this, and you know, makes for a funny story in the parking lot. But hey, simple solution and effective. The last thing I wanted to point out was for these trunnion mount bolts, there is a washer and bushing which press into the frame, and these have worn out over the season and developed some play. So that is kind of the biggest drawback I've found, is that the bushings in here, a lot of force going into them, and it's kind of like your standard DU bushing that you'd find on like a RockShox. It has created like a knocking at the top of the travel that don't really notice while riding, but if you get into some really chattery stuff, you definitely do notice it a bit. So it's kind of just the play that's in there. Yeah, has become slightly more noticeable as it's worn out. Now we're gonna put it all back together.